In the premiere episode of Stranger Things, Will Byers is hunted and captured by Demogorgon. But what would happen if he was able to flee until Joyce or Jonathan got home? We're about to find out. This is the third alternate timeline video I have made, and in this series I change one event in a fictional universe and then analyse the butterfly effect of all the events it changes. The most obvious difference we have from the show is that Will isn't in the Upside Down and the Demogorgon returns empty-handed. Dustin, Lucas and Mike never join the Will search party and are therefore probably playing Dungeons & Dragons on the night they were otherwise destined to bump into Eleven in the woods. This means Eleven doesn't have a place to hide and is most likely recaptured by Papa. Brenner has such large coverage over the Hawkins area and he is constantly sending search parties and eventually tracks down Eleven. If she finds a home to hide in, Brenner has shown his ability to rip her from any good Samaritan that has offered her shelter. I think Eleven would be in a similar situation in Hawkins that Will was in the Upside Down. She'll hide and escape for a while, but it won't last forever. But in the short term, Elle returns to Hawkins' lab and Brenner uses her to find either one or the Demogorgon, potentially to close the portal. Another path that opens up here is that Joyce never contacts Hopper to help her find her missing son, halting the development of any friendship that they've developed over the seasons. Now, it is worth noting that in the show, they mention that they have had relations in high school prior to the first episode of Stranger Things, but hardships and common enemies draw people together. Key instigators such as both which shared the loss of a child. Hop tried to do for Will what he couldn't do for his daughter, and in the show, the two fought a greater paranormal evil that threatened the wider town. I struggle to see them developing so tightly without these interactions. Now, the argument can be made that after a traumatic chase, Will tells his mother, who in turn contacts Hop, to try and investigate a shady figure that hunted him in the night. Hopper investigates the house, and short of the fried phone, there's little else to go off. He tells the two to contact him further if they see any strange things. Boring. It's insufficient to spark the connection between Hop and Joyce nonetheless. Now, also in this alternate timeline, the Demogorgon leaves the Byers household alone rather than haunting it over the following season. This is pretty straightforward. It continued to frequent the Byers house in search of Will, who was in the Upside Down, and kept returning to his home. And assuming that Will's abduction in episode 1 was purely random selection and not part of a larger plan, which we don't completely know at this point, there is no lingering interest in the house. This means overworld Will does not continue to be haunted, and more importantly, Joyce doesn't have to sell an arm and a leg to finance her new Christmas light and phone addiction. And furthermore, she doesn't Miley Cyrus the living room wall. With Will safe at home, Jonathan doesn't go all Colin Creevy and is not in the woods the night Barb gets snatched by the Demogorgon. Consequently, there are no pictures of her nor Nancy, therefore reducing Jonathan's overall character creepiness. The Demogorgon snatches its first victim, Barb. Jonathan's camera is safe from Steve, but more importantly, he doesn't have the photos which spark conversation between himself and Nancy. Remembering that hardships and common enemies draw people together, while Jonathan now doesn't share the pain of having someone missing, nor the sighting of the monster which took Barb, this relationship ceases to develop. I like him more with Steve anyway. Now, there is a chance that Barb is spared from this demogorgonous fate. That is definitely not a word. Given that Nancy used the excuse of Will's assembly to go out to Steve's party with Barb, would she still go to Steve's party without this excuse? Yes, pretty much is my answer to that question. We've seen how resourceful and clever Nancy is, and I have no doubt she'll conjure up another excuse. Barb is still doomed, so sorry, Barb. Furthermore, Will's fake corpse never surfaces at the quarry, and Hop never butchers it to find if it's stuffed or fake. He has no reason to find Hawkins' lab sus, votes skip, and doesn't investigate the facility. In Hawkins, kids with cuts begin to disappear over the coming months, but there is still no clear evidence of the Demogorgon nor the Upside Down. Hopper spends some time investigating Barb's disappearance, but ultimately comes up empty-handed. In the canon show, several moving parts contributed to the discoveries, such as Eleven's explanation of the Upside Down, Jonathan's photograph of the Demogorgon, Joyce's Christmas lights and phone abnormalities, and Hopper's investigation of Hawkins' laboratory, all of which cease to occur. One outcome that does still occur in this alternate timeline is the boys' Kumpai are still affected by the portal and therefore do not point true north, and eventually Joyce's fridge magnets also. Is this enough to determine the strange things happening in Hawkins? Stretch. And I doubt it. I wouldn't be surprised if the curious kids snooped around the lab in search for what was affecting their compasses, however. As disappearances increase, so does Hopper's job stress, but there is little paranormal evidence to expect that anything happening is outside the realm of the normal world these characters have grown up in. Joyce previously provided Hopper with a lead after Will was chased, but all signs still point to a kidnapper-killer frequenting Hawkins rather than the more unlikely Demogorgon. Steve and Nancy's relationship survives a little longer in this timeline, with events not instigating their separation. Steve's selfishness and prioritized concern for his own trouble over Barb being missing still occurs, but the main tensions in the show arise when Nancy is hanging with Jonathan, causing Steve to believe they're cheating on him and consequently slut-shaming Nancy. I don't think they'll be together forever, and I think the longer they're together, the worse, given Steve admits in season 4 that he needed that kick up the butt from the breakup to develop and learn from his mistakes. So without this event, likely he continues to be selfish, cocky, and never really develops into the fan favourite he is today, which is unfortunate for Steve. So hopefully Nancy rips his heart out at some stage soon. 11 never forces Troy to wet himself. So himself and James never force Mike to jump off the quarry, which would otherwise have been fatal, most likely, without 11 being there. Season 1 concludes with the party united, Joyce sane, Jonathan friendless, Nancy and Steve happier but still doomed, 11 friendless and back in the lab, Hawkins missing half a dozen kids, and Hopper searching for a kidnapper. Notably also, Will doesn't cough up the Demodog larvae which he consumed from the Upside Down vines, and which ultimately starts the outbreak of Demodogs in the second season. He also lacks connection with the hive mind and the flashes in the Upside Down. Begins season 2 and Max enters the show. She still develops a friendship with the party given these events are not influenced by the paranormal activities in the show. The only thing that would affect this is if her parents decide not to move to Hawkins, given the increase in kidnappings over the past year. With the Demogorgon still the antagonist in this season rather than the Demodog outbreak, kids continue to disappear, pumpkin patches remain ripe for Halloween, and the second season is much more compact, with similar events to the alternate first season timeline. 11 doesn't meet 8, and nor does she meet her mother to truly understand the evil of Brenna and how she came into existence. Nancy begins to notice how selfish Steve is with his disregard for Barb's disappearance. The lab is never closed as Brenna tries to use 11 to defeat the Demogorgon that is causing problems in Hawkins, but we'll get to that later. Billy survives and terrorizes Max and Steve, and eventually Steve and Nancy break up, though she doesn't get together with Jonathan. Do we see her grow to be such a strong woman without supporting Jonathan through his hardships with Will? And do we see Jonathan developing socially without being pushed into social settings by Nancy? That may put those two characters on two completely different paths for development, or lack thereof. Will Hopper have another chance at a child? Remembering that when he took on 11, this was really pivotal to him becoming a better man and having a second chance at parenthood. It helped him really develop further as a character. But it also, now we're going to lack that development of 11 as a character. She will never develop socially, form any language or family. She won't know right from wrong, or won't have any kind of moral compass if she remains under the strict rules of Brenna. Ultimately, she could end up being a really dangerous war weapon, as kind of she was on the track to be before she escaped Brenna. Dustin never raises Dart as he doesn't exist. And without needing Steve to help him find his pet, because once again, his pet doesn't exist, this quirky duo never developed their friendship either. This is bad for Steve's character, again, who continues his cocky streak and seems to learn a lot from the kids in the time of the show. It also will now hinder Dustin's development, who lacks an older male role model friendship with no present father. This may lead to more insecurity and lack of confidence, less social skills and awareness, and less confidence talking to girls, like we see when he approaches a few girls at the school dance, even though he wasn't overly successful. However, it still takes away the experience of dancing with Nancy, which, first of all, major rip, but more importantly, it was another significant learning experience for him in interacting with girls. Breaking down the characters, I believe Lucas can still develop a relationship with Max, though their hardships from the paranormal events do help progress this in the show. The boys all remain close, with Mike not having a girlfriend and therefore having much more time for Will. So it looks like he shot himself in the foot getting captured by the Demogorgon in the first episode, because that's really all he wanted, was more time with Mike. Maybe different kind of time to what Mike wanted with Will. Joyce remains with Sam Wise. 11 doesn't develop friendships, love, and empathy. Steve remains selfish until broken up with by Nancy, though he also never slut-shames her. And Jonathan never experiences a girlfriend either. Will's disappearance not only helps out Mike, but it also helps out Jonathan in the dating department. Dustin and Steve never develop a friendship, as this comes from them searching for Dart, who I think I've really driven home that he doesn't exist, which otherwise helped Steve's character develop in the real timeline. Hop tries to find the elusive killer that keeps popping up in the town, and hopefully for him, he never finds it, because I don't like his chances, given Demogorgons are hard enough to kill when you know what you're going up against. And he doesn't. Importantly, a lot of these characters have so many of their hardships and traumas stripped away from their character development. Long story short, a lot of these kids live pretty standard 80s childhoods, and with Rick Astley about to drop Never Gonna Give You Up in a year, the kids they're in for a good time. They're in for a good time there. Whoa, hold your horses, I hear you say. What's going on in Hawkins' laboratory? Well, the lab contains most of the paranormal and interesting things that are happening in Hawkins underneath everybody's noses. In my new timeline, the Season 3 rats avoid infection and the virus doesn't enter the steelworks. The monster once again is replaced by the Demogorgon as the main antagonist for the season. The only people that know about the Demogorgon 1 and the Upside Down are all in Hawkins' laboratory, and the entire fate of Hawkins, and obviously the world, do still hinge on 11, but with Brenna as her support rather than the Stranger Things crew. You would assume by now it would be in Brenna's best interest to assign 11 to kill the Demogorgon. It surely would have started attracting some attention to his clandestine operations and would have raised the question, would 11 be strong enough to defeat the Demogorgon in this new timeline? My first thought is yes, she would be. She's given a much more vigorous training regime and on paper would be stronger than she has ever peaked at on the show. Despite her lack of love and friendship in this new timeline, Brenna has shown an ability to harness 11's powers, and given some of the enemies she's coming up against since in the show, the Demogorgon doesn't look all that scary. I think her bigger problem is probably in her face-off versus 1. And this is where I'm going to pose the question down below. Can 11, under Brenna's control, defeat Vecna and save Hawkins? Now, let's have a look at a quick pros and cons list. Pros. Brenna has had much more time to harness 11's powers, having grown up completely in a lab setting with strict training programs. 11 has all the facilities available within the lab to build her to be the best she can be. 11 has a wealth of knowledge from Brenna available rather than having to half discover things over the course of 4 seasons. Cons. 11 lacks compassion, love, care, and probably any appreciation for people, lies, and the right thing. She lacks the purpose she was able to develop, making friends and interacting with the party, Max and Hop. She also doesn't have the team working simultaneously with her to help distract and defeat her enemies, which they help her with throughout the first few seasons of the show. And here's another point. Would Brenna even want to defeat Vecna? May he try to win him back and ultimately doom Hawkins in the process? Will the Russians destroy Brenna and 11's progress before they can achieve this, by intervening with the program like when they came to town in Season 2? Will this arise some new conflicts that we didn't get to see in the show because these events didn't particularly overlap during the course of the show? To what extent will Hop recognize the abnormal disappearances, and will the boys investigate the lab after their faulty kampai draw them enough curiosity to involve themselves with the Hawkins lab experiments? Long story short, depending on Brenner's ability to harness Eleven's powers, Will's avoidance of the underground... Oh, I was playing Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. Will's avoidance of the Upside Down prohibits the relationships of Joyce and Hopper, Nancy and Jonathan, and Eleven and Mike all from taking place. Eleven and Jonathan stay in their shells while Joyce stays with Bob, and Mike, Nancy, and Hop likely find other people down the track. Steve never has his redemption arc, and neither does Billy. The party keep going about 80s teen life, and Kate Bush doesn't have a 2022 resurgence. To wrap this up, the show is definitely much less exciting, with minimal character development and no interaction between characters outside of their own social circles. People randomly disappear from the town, and paranormal entities are never suspected. And with regard to Eleven, it would be a miracle if she did not end up evil. There is always debate as to nature versus nurture, but one thing that many historical serial killers have in common is an abusive childhood with little social connection. I don't like the direction of the new world in this timeline. Even if Eleven is able to defeat one, she may just be an even greater and more unstoppable villain. I'll be curious to know what you think. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.